Well, thanks, Angela, and thank you, colleagues, and my apologies for messing up the very well-planned schedule for today. I came with quite a number of messages to impart to you, but it's me that stands between you and lunch, apparently. And apparently it's been put back. I thought, I'm really making friends here, aren't I, this morning? But firstly, can I express my thanks, Angela, to, everyone here today, but especially to our members of our Disabled Members Advisory Committee and our Equal Opportunities Committee for not only putting together today's programme, but for your continuing leadership and demonstration of the vital importance that we attach to our equalities agenda, but also for ensuring that equality for disabled members remains at the top of our agenda as NASUWT. Now, you don't need me to tell you, I kind of heard a little bit of that in your last session about how challenging the times have been for all of our members, but especially so for our disabled members. And we know from our own research and from the feedback we received from you colleagues, just how impactful the last few years have been. We know from our research, our teacher wellbeing research, that disabled teachers express some of the lowest wellbeing scores of all teachers, and they're pretty low for the generality of teachers. Some 2/3 of disabled teachers experiencing poor health due to their work. And that compares with just 40%. I say just 40%, my goodness, what am I saying? Just 40% of the generality of teachers, it's outrageous. But 2/3 of disabled teachers saying that they're experiencing poor health due to their work. Disabled teachers 4 times more likely than non-disabled colleagues to report that they've been admitted to hospital because of their work, and more likely to experience work-related stress. That's evidence, colleagues, evidence of a system that's stacked against disabled workers, stacked against disabled teachers, leaving many of you in an incredibly precarious position when it comes to not only your employment, but your careers as well. And it's not just working conditions, it's also pay. That cost of living crisis, which you've just been discussing, where we've seen how it's having a disproportionate impact on disabled teachers. Our Big Question survey, we're really proud of that survey, year on year collecting data about the experience of teachers right across the profession. And it found that disabled teachers were more likely to be worried and anxious about their financial situation than were the generality of teachers. And we should not be surprised at that, colleagues, when we know what is the lived experience of disabled teachers in the workplace. And now the government's asking you to prepare for worse to come. And if the worst happens in next week's budget, we can expect further cuts to public spending, and that's going to have a disastrous impact, it has to be said, potentially a catastrophic impact on what's happening within schools and colleges and your experience at work. Cuts that will mean job loss. Job loss not just of school support staff, but no doubt of teachers as well. 90% of head teachers are saying that right now, even without those budget cuts next week, they will not be able to get through to the end of this academic year without going into deficit. And we know what that means. It means cuts to jobs. It means a narrowing, even further narrowing of the curriculum. It means cuts to special educational needs support and support for pupils with disabilities. But it also means misery for disabled teachers as well. Over the course of the last decade, colleagues, you don't need me to tell you this, but I'm going to do it anyway. You've suffered a huge assault on your pay. Your pay has been in free fall, colleagues. And this year, the government's imposed the biggest real terms pay cut in a generation. And now, we've got a government that's asking you to trust them with managing the economy. I mean, this is the government that got us into this mess in the first place. And if we don't trust them and we want to protest against what the government has planned by taking industrial action to defend your rights and your pay at work, the government's got a plan to deal with that as well. It wants to abolish your right to take strike action, blaming everybody except themselves for a mess that was created in number 10 Downing Street. Well, colleagues, I want to say this again, that this union, the NASUWT, will do everything in our power to oppose those who are seeking to attack your rights at work and seeking to stop you from taking part in lawful industrial action. And whilst we're at it, we'll also be pressing for the repeal of all anti-trade union laws. Now, I know you've got a speaker from the Labour Party, Shadow Education Secretary. I hope she has a better journey than I did this morning anyway. But, I like Bridget, but colleagues, give her a hard time, because the reality is we want a government that is prepared to repeal those anti-trade union laws, starting with repealing those anti-trade union ballot thresholds and repealing the laws that prevent us as a trade union from being able to ballot you for industrial action using electronic balloting. Well, frankly, colleagues, if it's good enough for the Tory party to elect their leader, and the Prime Minister twice, effectively, using electronic balloting, then it's time that working people were given the right to exercise their fundamental right to vote for strike action and to protest about the government's treatment of them at work. Teachers didn't create this cost of living crisis, and frankly, I'm going to do everything in my power to ensure that you, colleagues, are not made to pay the price for it. And you know the facts. You know the facts, colleagues. You know the facts of what's happened over the course of these last 12 years. On average, a classroom teacher has lost £50,000 in real terms since 2010. That's what they would have had their pay kept pace with inflation. And now the government's saying you've got the best possible pay deal that the country can afford. But actually, rubbing salt in the wounds, the government isn't even prepared to stump up the additional cash to pay for that below inflation pay award. So we know again what that will mean for our members in schools. For years, colleagues, we've had governments that have worked on the principle that they can get away with paying you as little as possible. For years, they've asserted that it's possible to run schools and colleges, the NHS, social care, other public services on a shoestring. So no wonder, colleagues, no wonder that alongside us, nurses and midwives, civil servants, firefighters, and a raft of other public sector workers are balloting for and taking industrial action. And colleagues, we applaud all of those unions. All of those unions that have led their members to smash those Tory anti-trade union laws. But now, colleagues, it's our turn to do just that. Teachers' pay, according to independent evidence, is at the bottom of the graduate league table. Colleagues, now is the time for us to stop the rot. It's right, colleagues, for you to be angry about how you have been treated in terms of your pay. But I have to say this, being angry is not enough. We've got to channel that anger. We've got to force government and employers to listen and to act. Now, for months, they've avoided engagement. They've wanted to say that the situation was going to go away, that teachers would forget about it all. We've asked them to get around the table. We've asked them to stop taking the teaching profession for granted. We've waited we've acted responsibly, we've been patient, but colleagues, now the time is up and we need your support to deliver a once-in-a-generation vote for action with our vote for a better deal for teachers. That ballot, as you know, is taking place across state-funded schools and academies, sixth form colleges and independent schools in England, Scotland and in Wales. But can I give a shout out for our colleagues here today in Northern Ireland, and I'm not sure if we've got any colleagues from the Isle of Man, but if we have, to them as well, for showing the way, for leading the way, showing that it is possible, colleagues, for us to send that clear and emphatic message to government, to employers, that teachers deserve better, because our members in Northern Ireland are fighting that better deal for teachers. They've secured the vote. They are now taking action, and our members in the Isle of Man are doing the same. Colleagues, we applaud them, and we look forward to their success in their fight. Their success in their fight for that better deal. So colleagues elsewhere, governments are going to say that industrial action isn't going to change anything. Well, colleagues, it will. They will say that industrial action is only going to hurt children who have already been damaged as a result of the pandemic. Well, you know what? I agree. Children and young people have suffered under this government. But it's the actions of government, not our actions. It's the actions of government that's been hurting children. You know, if schools can't recruit enough teachers, or they can't keep the teachers that they've got, or teachers are demoralised, then children suffer. That's a fact. And the public agrees with us. Colleagues, you want a better deal. Parents want a better deal for their children, and now it is time for the government to sit up and listen. Colleagues, I know you've got a session a bit later on, so I won't steal my colleagues' fire with regard to that. But I want to say this. We've issued ballot papers to members who are eligible to vote in these ballots. And colleagues, if you've had your ballot paper, why haven't you returned it? Or have you? Good! I have. Oh, well, hands up. Look at that. Thumbs going up, hands going up. Fantastic stuff. Brilliant stuff. But for the rest of your colleagues, I'm not going to make an example of you here today, but I'm going to say this. If you're sitting on your ballot paper thinking, look, I'll wait until it's a bit quieter, I've got plenty of time, lose that thought. If you're sitting on your ballot paper thinking, oh, I want to understand all the facts of the matter, well, just have a look at your last pay slip. You know, those are the facts of the matter. There's no reason to delay voting. So get that ballot paper returned. If you've got it with you, fill it out and get it into a post box. If it's still sitting at home, the first thing you need to do when you get home is get that ballot paper out, put the 2 crosses in the 2 boxes, yes, yes, for strike action and action short of strike action, colleagues, and get it back in the post box. It's really important, colleagues, because this government wants to stop you taking industrial action. It wants to stop that protest. And what the government has said by setting anti-trade union ballot thresholds is that if not enough of our members, half of eligible members, turn out to vote, then effectively we no longer have a dispute. Now, I know you're angry about your pay, so we have a dispute. You need to tell us and you need to tell the government that you're angry about your pay by returning your ballot paper. And when you go back into school on Monday or sometime next week, whenever it is, speak with colleagues. Don't worry if they're not NASUWT, because everybody's being balloted at the moment. So I don't think it really matters. Speak to your NASUWT colleagues, yeah? Speak to your NEU colleagues. Speak to your NAHT colleagues. Speak to whoever you need to speak to about the fact that you are voting and you think they should do so too. It's really important, colleagues, because every vote really does count. And I know colleagues are worried about the implications of voting for industrial action. The first important thing to remember, colleagues, is if we get that yes, yes vote, that sends a really important message to government that this is a teaching profession. These are members who are seriously fed up, not just about their pay, but seriously fed up with this government. And you know what? It's important that we continue to give that message to government that actually the teaching profession is not behind them. But I know that colleagues are worried about the financial implications of industrial action. And the National Action Committee and myself are acutely aware of that. And that's why we are saying we want you to vote yes for strike action, but also yes for action short of strike action. And why are we doing that, colleagues? We're doing that because we know we're in the middle of the worst cost of living crisis for half a century. So we don't want to ask any more of you or any of our members than we need to ask. And that includes asking you to take strike action with a consequential loss of pay. So, we are balancing that up by saying, yes, strike action if we need to and if we must, but action short of strike action. If the government and employers are paying you less, then we're saying you should do less. Colleagues, I heard at the end of your last debate about the financial difficulties that members are facing, and I heard Claire, our Chair of Equal Opportunities Committee, highlighting the real importance of the NASUWT benevolence scheme, whether or not we are taking industrial action next year. Members are in financial difficulty right here, right now. And that's why the National Executive has said that we want to step up our support with our benevolent support for our members. So colleagues, if you feel that you are in financial difficulty or you know of members who are in financial difficulty, point them our way. We see that as our duty of care to you, as our responsibility to you, to do whatever we can to help to get you through this cost of living crisis. So I'm going to wrap up now, Angela, with a few more words, but just a few. The fight on pay is really important. But colleagues, I have to say, that's one of many fights that we're having. Continuing our campaigning on what you and other members are telling us that we need to prioritise. Whether that's fighting against excessive workload or limiting working hours of teachers in schools, tackling bullying and abusive management practices, dealing with the rising scourge of poor pupil behaviour, violence in your classrooms, in your schools. Our campaigning for justice for our supply teacher members. Our work to highlight the issues of sexual harassment and misogyny in the workplace and in our union. The championing of our work on neurodiversity. The perennial fight for reasonable adjustments at work for our disabled members, our work to advance LGBTI rights, and of course, our action on anti-racism. Colleagues, there's a huge agenda for us to tackle, but not least, we need to tackle the unscrupulous actions of employers who see disabled workers as less productive or too costly to employ. We have to tackle that, colleagues. I'm proud of the work of the TUC, I think Kudji is still in the room, on long COVID. Their recent study, colleagues, if you've not seen it, have a look at it, that found that disabled workers are increasingly subject to unacceptable treatment at work. Unacceptable treatment that includes employers not believing that you have a disability, the treatment of suspicion from employers, the bullying use of sickness absence procedures, the threats of capability, disciplinary action or redundancy, or the loss of job because you've contracted long COVID. So that's why we have to continue our fight on COVID and on long COVID, despite the fact that the government would have us believe that there is no longer an issue. And that's why we'll also be using the independent public inquiry into the government's mishandling of COVID to highlight the issues, to ensure that lessons are learned, and to hold the government to account. Colleagues, I want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you for your engagement in the union and for your activism. But it doesn't stop here today. It starts here today. It continues when you go back to your workplaces. It continues when you go back to your local associations and engage in meetings in your local associations. It continues with you stepping up to become workplace reps, to become better deal contacts, to become equality officers, health and safety officers, local secretaries, or indeed national executive members or national officers. Colleagues, that's really important to us. Why? Because we know that the diversity of our union is the strength of our union. So colleagues, together, let's stand together strong. Let's stand together and win that better deal for disabled teachers, for the teaching profession as a whole, for the pupils that you teach, and let's demonstrate once again why the NASUWT is and should be proud to call itself the Teachers' Union. Stay safe, stay active. Thank you, colleagues.